Okay, so I guess I'll address this situation with Venezuela. I skipped over it yesterday because I didn't really feel like there were enough details out, so I wanted to wait and read some more about it so that I really got a good, um, a good feel for the situation and what exactly went on. And so, if you haven't heard, essentially there was some attempted coup plot that was foiled by the Venezuelans. It was apparently a plot to, just go in and capture Maduro and declare Juan Guaido to be the president. The same goal that a operation, last year, around the same time, I think April 30th of last year, had and failed to accomplish. And so this basically looks like a replay of the Bay of Pigs back from 1961. That's the comparison that most people are drawing, and of course that's a very favorable comparison for Maduro and a very unfavorable comparison for the United States. Essentially, you had this ragtag group of, defectors slash foreign collaborators who don't like Maduro. There were some Americans, in the group, but apparently most of the actual foot soldiers were Venezuelan defectors, and they were led by this boy Guaido, who was a retired Green Beret living in Florida, and also another Venezuelan defector. Apparently there was a third at some point, but I guess he got arrested for drug trafficking or something. I'm not entirely sure what his role was, but I believe he was a retired general from Venezuela. But anyway, they in Colombia set up these camps that were, normal mercenary training camps, or well, not mercenary, rebels, whatever. It was from all accounts. I've read some excerpts from interviews with people who had visited the camps. They didn't seem particularly well supplied. They weren't well trained. There was not much, they didn't seem like a very serious fighting force. And so I think there was a couple of different people who visited the camps, the impression they got was that, these guys were not overthrowing any governments. And of course, since it was only 300 people, that's not a lot to go and overthrow a country. If 300 people could take over a country and conquer it, then I think that I might try and go and do that myself and conquer my own country. I could probably find 300 people who would, recognize me as their king and fight under me, and then go and try and conquer some, tiny country like, I don't know, Belize or something. Something that's, not too big of a prize. I mean, Venezuela is a pretty big country. So if it takes 300 guys, maybe we'd only need 100 guys to take Belize or Barbados or some small, Caribbean nation like that. But alas, these 300 guys couldn't get anything done. They couldn't even get off the boat. Apparently they were captured trying to land in Venezuela. Now, I'm not entirely sure why they were going by boat if they were in Colombia, which has a land border with Venezuela. I assume it's because, I believe Caracas is on the water, so that's probably why they were doing it, because they didn't want to walk wherever they were in Colombia. It was probably a pretty long walk from Caracas, and of course, if you're walking, if you've got a column of soldiers marching through Venezuela, armed and everything, that probably is going to draw a bit of attention. But of course, when you go by boat, that has its risks too. The risk being that somebody sees this boat with all these guys, and they decide to pull a Coast Guard and say, hey, what's in the boat? You guys got all your life jackets that you're supposed to have? And so these guys ended up getting captured, and they've got pictures of all their weapons and things. They had a few, AR drum mags, which, I don't know how reliable those are. I don't know why you always see that. You saw the same thing last year with the attempted Guaido coup. They had, 100-round drum mags. I mean, aren't those things kind of unreliable? And they're heavy and expensive and make the gun kind of feel weird. I mean, I don't know. Maybe that's a weird nitpick, but I don't know why these guys don't just stick to PMags. So they were captured, and there were two Americans who apparently happened to have their passports because the Venezuelans have published, their passports that they found on them. I don't know why, if these guys are going to try and overthrow the Venezuelan government, why they would have their IDs on them and their passports, because, then your passport can get taken away if you carry it on you. So, I don't know, that seems a bit suspicious, but again, maybe they were just dumb, because this didn't seem like a very well thought out plot. The reason they were caught, supposedly, is that Maduro had moles inside their operation, which is not surprising. If they were just taking, defectors off the street, well, then all Maduro had to do was tell one of his spies, hey, go and defect and join these guys, and then just keep tabs on them for me and tell me when they're gonna, launch their operation. And, apparently, a few of their folks, at least one spy inside that organization let them know. And so I don't know what happened to the 300 guys. Apparently they only came into contact with 10 of them, maybe, on this one boat. They killed 8 and captured 2. And the 2 that they captured were both Americans, which I find strange. Were these guys second in command under the Guaido guy? I mean, were they the only Americans? Were they normal fighters? Were they leaders? I don't know. And so this is obviously a very big win for Maduro, because he can hold up these 2 Americans and say, look, America's trying to overthrow me. They want to destroy our country. They want to kill us. They want to take me out. It's like that dumb Boomer Trump meme, to where where it has Trump sitting in a dark room. And I think the top text says something like, hey, they act like they really hate me, but the reason why they hate me is because I'm the only thing between them and you. They really hate you. That's kind of the routine that Maduro's pulling right now. That, America wants to destroy Venezuela, and I'm in their way. And as much as I don't think that Maduro's doing a very good job, protecting the Venezuelan people or helping them prosper or anything like that, as bad as he is, I mean, he does have a point in that, it's not like, the Americans just want to shower Venezuela with prosperity. What they want is, natural resources and things. They want, companies to be able to go in there and get sweetheart deals from the government to do, all sorts of things. And they want Venezuela's military to buy our weapons and, everything else that comes with being a U.S. client state. So you don't have to be, a fan of Maduro to recognize that the United States doesn't have good intentions either. And so the question becomes, who was behind this whole operation? Was it the CIA? Or were these really just a ragtag band of guys who just didn't like Maduro? Because it wasn't a very big group, so it's not unfeasible to think that these are just other than the spies, of course, genuine guys who wanted to take out the Venezuelan government. And, of course, guys who are in the U.S. military, Green Berets and stuff like that, who are kind of regime change agents to begin with. It would make sense that if they really bought into what they were doing and supported the missions that they were given, that after they get out of the military, that they would still be inclined towards those same positions, that even without being told to do so, that they would support regime change in these countries and try to facilitate it. And so I don't think it's entirely impossible that these guys were just acting of their own volition, but I do find it pretty unlikely. Because everything to do with the Venezuelan opposition seems to be pretty closely tied to the State Department or the CIA or the National Endowment for Democracy, which is the CIA front group. And there's also been, reporting about a meeting between this guy Guaido and Keith Schiller, who was Trump's bodyguard for, much of his life. He doesn't work in the White House anymore, but Schiller, in the time that he worked for Trump, was considered a pretty trusted advisor in general. Trump had trust in this guy as a person, not just as his bodyguard. And so the fact that, Guaido and Schiller have met in the past would seem to indicate that the White House, should have had some foreknowledge of what was going on with this whole thing. And, maybe they didn't, directly assist, but they didn't stop them either. And the reason I say they didn't directly assist is because of how poorly done this was. The CIA, if they wanted to overthrow Maduro by these means, I would think, I think of government in general, the U.S. government in particular, because that's where I live, as being pretty incompetent with a lot of things. They screw things up. But I do have a certain level of respect for, even though I disagree with everything the CIA does, with their ability to carry out, their goals. And I would have to think that if the CIA really put their minds to it and they were trying to back these guys to overthrow Maduro, they would have gotten a little bit farther. The accounts that I've heard of these camps, of how dilapidated the conditions were, and how, hopeless the whole endeavor was, really makes me think that these guys were resource resource constricted. I think the guy that visited the camps makes the same point, that this does not look like something that's being directly backed by the U.S. government, because they would be much better equipped and better trained, and they would have, you would think, CIA advisors there actually training them, because that's a lot of what the CIA does. I mean, the CIA, had camps in Afghanistan training Al-Qaeda back in the 70s. In fact, I think they might have still had some even going out leading up to 9/11. And of course, that's also what the Green Berets do, training people on the ground, just like in Vietnam and stuff. And so, from the accounts that I've heard, there weren't any official U.S. advisors working in these camps. It was all these, these private guys, these, retired military folks. But there are two more things that really stick out that are a concern as far as the role of the U.S. government is concerned. One is that John Bolton tweeted out on April 30th. I believe the American Conservative caught this, the magazine. I believe I read it in their article, which I think I'll link that one in the description. They caught that John Bolton on April 30th, the anniversary, I believe, of that last attempted coup last year, which didn't go anywhere, that he tweeted, "Morning is coming in Venezuela, again." And by again, it sounds like he's referring to something that happened in the past. And, well, exactly a year before he tweeted that, there was that attempted coup. So it sounded like John Bolton was saying, hey, there's going to be a coup in Venezuela. He said that on April 30th. Well, today's May 5th. And this coup attempt happened, last Sunday. In other words, right after John Bolton tweeted that. And so John Bolton, at the very least, seems to have had foreknowledge of this. Now, John Bolton is another one who, because of Venezuela, was kicked out of the administration because, he was incompetent and advised Trump to do bad things. Now, Trump should have never had him there to begin with, but the fact that Bolton was fired and that this Operation Gideon, they called it, seems to have been affiliated with John Bolton, makes me think again that this doesn't have direct White House ties. This seems like, if Bolton is involved and not, say, the current National Security Advisor, I would have to think that these are probably guys who are 1 degree removed from the U.S. government, former U.S. government people, just like this Guaido guy, a former Green Beret, John Bolton, a former, National Security Advisor. And I'm sure lots of other neocons who are in Washington, and there were probably many people, because this whole thing with Guaido is very well tied in with the U.S. establishment. Even though I said the CIA directly probably wasn't, training these guys, or actually, I believe they definitely weren't, then the NED, which is a CIA cutout, probably was very much associated with them. They at least indirectly, I'm sure, funded this whole operation, because Juan Guaido, who the NED does back, apparently signed a contract for general services with Guaido's company. And Guaido, I believe he's considered a private military contractor. Now, Guaido denies this, but Guaido says that he has the contract. So if Guaido can produce that, well, then that would prove that, essentially, Guaido hired Guaido to overthrow Maduro for him. And since Guaido is a U.S. Agent of sorts, I mean, he was educated by the U.S. and is following their script pretty closely, trying to be, the leader of the new pro-U.S. regime there. I don't see how Guaido would go about this without informing his handlers, unless he's just, totally incompetent and not a good partner for the U.S. So, at the very least, this undermines the credibility of Guaido as a close ally of the State Department, which should just be all the more reason for the State Department to drop their backing of him and to, stop trying to pretend that Maduro is not in charge. Because, when they were asked about this, the State Department didn't deny, by the way, that they were involved in this operation. They just said that, the former Maduro regime is, very good at disinformation. And, they called him the former regime, implying that, oh, well, Guaido's the new president, so Maduro's not in charge. Of course, all this comes after, not too long after the State Department, the Department of Justice, indicted Maduro on drug charges and, issued a warrant for his arrest, just like they did issue a warrant for Manuel Noriega's arrest before they invaded Panama. Now, these guys, said that their goal was not to assassinate Maduro, but to arrest him, and turn him over to the U.S. I guess, maybe they wanted that reward money. But this whole coup attempt does seem to be, somewhat of a direct was caused by this warrant for Maduro's arrest being issued. Now, maybe, maybe I think these camps actually were already in place, and the training for this operation had begun before the warrant was issued. So I'll retract that statement. But on the other hand, if the U.S. was coordinating with these guys, then the U.S. Might have issued this warrant in anticipation of this raid. But I think the biggest question coming out of here is sort of where do we go from here? Because there's no real sign that anybody wants to de-escalate here. Trump is not really coming out and trying to, have a détente. He's not offered to visit Venezuela or anything like that, or meet with Maduro like he did with Kim Jong-un. No matter what, though, it doesn't seem like things are going to calm down between the U.S. and Venezuela anytime soon. It just seems like we keep inching closer and closer. Like, Trump is not eager enough to pull the trigger on just overthrowing Maduro, but these escalations keep happening. The whole thing with sending the Navy down there and patrolling around there, and it feels like there could be some invasion at any moment. And like I've warned over the last couple of years, when we get close to the election, if things aren't looking too good for Trump, a quick military victory might be something that looks attractive to him, because you will remember the war spirit. It really does boost a president's approval ratings in the short term. So if Trump say to launch a war against Venezuela and to produce something that showed how Maduro had weapons of mass destruction, or maybe he wouldn't reuse that one, but if there was some other thing that he could produce about Maduro and say, oh look, Maduro's such a bad guy, when people in the U.S. don't like Venezuela to begin with. Because we've been very well conditioned, and of course it's a bad place to begin with, as far as I'm concerned. I don't like it at all, propaganda aside. But even putting that out, the propaganda against Maduro's government has been very effective, I think, in the U.S. And so a short, quick incursion, just like in Panama, to remove Maduro and install some new puppet, I think could boost Trump's approval in the short term. But I think he would only take that route if it looked like he was not doing too well in the polls. So no immediate danger of that or anything. And since Joe Biden is so weak, if Joe Biden does end up being nominated, Trump, we might not have to worry about, Trump it being a close election for him anyway. So with that said, if you get anything of value out of this video, I'd appreciate you clicking that like button and sharing this video. And if you haven't already, please do subscribe, because I do upload every day and I'd hate to have you miss one. So I'll see you folks back here tomorrow.